Book friends, we are back for one more episode of Most Bookish. If you haven't been here before, my name is Amanda, and we are reviewing all the things book-related, book memoir, book fiction. Maybe we'll do nonfiction, which memoir technically is nonfiction. So like the how-tos, maybe. It would have to be spectacular. I digress. You'll learn that I do that often here. We're back for part 3 of the Paris and Britney memoir reviews. Britney wrote The Woman in Me last year. Paris wrote the memoir. It's the actual name, guys. In part 1, we talked about Britney. Part 2, we talked about Paris. And there were themes that we saw throughout. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And I have to tell you, after all of my research, after reading the memoirs, after all of my research, I am pissed. I'm so angry. If you're not angry like I am angry, I need to know why. Maybe you don't have all the facts. We're going to give them to you right now. It's where my watch used to be, back in Paris. And Britney were being held in institutions against their will. So let's talk about some recurring themes throughout both memoirs. Again, if you didn't watch one or two, this is probably a good time to go back and watch them so you get the full story. But we'll do a quick synopsis, right? Britney, top of her game, killing it everywhere, hitting everybody baby one more time, selling all the records, doing all the touring, all over the place. Business lady, making the dollars, giving everybody work. Goes through personal stuff, breaks down, everybody takes over. The state takes over, her dad takes over, the people who pay her take over, everybody takes over her entire life and proceeds to tell her what to do for over a decade. They put her in institutions, they drug her, they mistreat her, they abuse her, etc., etc. Paris, before we knew her, we assumed the worst that we knew of her, or I assumed that the worst that I knew of her was really kind of her history of being with abusive men from some of her relationships early on. I don't know as much about her later relationships. I feel like she was more private with them. Also, she very purposely chooses not to say anybody's name other than her husband at the end. And I wonder if that's about taking power back or if it's just any type of libel situation gets avoided maybe that way. I don't know. She doesn't say their names. I'm not going to say their names anymore. I just thought that that was really the story. And I had no idea that there's a story underneath the story. For right when we first start to hear Paris Hilton's name, she goes away for a bit of time. Where does she go? She goes to a teen rehabilitation center for troubled teens that she gets sent to by her parents, where they abduct her in the middle of the night and then they send her to this place until she is 18 and can finally get out of there. She gets abused. She gets forcibly given medication. She gets mistreated. Again, recurring themes here, right? She ages out. She gets the hell out of there. We never hear anything about this until she did a documentary a couple of years ago. She's currently a very vocal advocate against facilities like this. She brings other survivors to the forefront to talk about their experiences in these places. How could these things have happened to two such powerful young women? Well, let's start there, shall we? One, they were both young women. And while we like to think, we always like to think, every generation likes to believe that they are the most evolved generation, that they are the most, shall we say, civilized group. The reality is, very often when we look back, we see that not so much. In this particular case, we're still living through, in the late 90s, early 2000s, we're still living through ideas of morality that exist in society at different degrees depending on what your social structure looks like, right? So if you tend to be involved in more religious groups, then your morality structure is a bit different from people who aren't as involved with those groups. But overall, the mores around morality that existed at that time were much more traditional than what they are today. Now, are there still morality biases, discriminations, differing standards between men and women, male and female, especially when it comes to young women and young men? Yes. But since we're playing the same game, we're pretending like we are the most civilized generation and we don't subscribe to a lot of things that our forebears subscribe to. What things are we talking about? What things could I possibly be referring to? Let's talk about something like a purity ball. What is that? Is it a cosmic ball of pure energy? No, it is a formal occasion where young girls pledge to be pure, aka remain virginal, until marriage before God or their religious higher authority. But this is mostly Christian, so we're going to say God. They make this promise to God and their father, a lot of times presents them with their purity ring with the promise that they are going to be their shield and their protector until such time that their husband, their future husband, comes to take that place and act in that way for them. The purity balls came about as a result of a couple of decades of legislation around abstinence in all its forms, and purity became a byproduct of some of that propaganda. So think in the 80s, there was a lot of Just Say No. Early 90s, Just Say No is about abstinence around drugs, especially with the AIDS pandemic. This rolls into the best way for teenagers to avoid STDs is abstinence, and then that rolls into purity. And because we are a patriarchy, it is primarily aimed at maintaining the female's purity. Also, if you want to go even further back, we can get into the whole Adam and Eve idea, where Eve is responsible for the original sin, and thus everything that comes after is a result of her first behavior. And if you control or secure the correct behavior that you want from the female, we're talking 90s, 2000s here. We're not going to get into binary, non-binary, female gendered versus, this is not the video for that. We're talking about what was referred to as a young girl at that time. So if you basically stop the girl from the immoral or impure actions, whichever they may be, depending on your particular sect, then the rest falls into alignment. You also have the argument in there that because of Eve's original sin, women are inherently impure, and therefore, for their and society's own good, should be subject to the authority of men. Does any of this sound off some like alarm bells when we start thinking about Britney being under her father's care for a huge portion of her adult life? Does any of this tie in to Paris's parents feeling justified in having grown men abduct their daughter in the dark of night to save her from her wild behavior? And you can just see evidence of things like this throughout history, right? There have been morality laws in this country in different capacities in different regions since the country was first founded. I'm a book person, right? You want to take it back to like Harlequin romance and examples of British etiquette where a woman had to be pure even if she was raped. It was somehow a stain upon her honor. The family would keep it hidden because if they didn't, when they were out in public, people would walk across the street to get away from this impure woman. That's not even getting into if they chose to do something that was immoral, whether it was exposing themselves, and by exposing at that time, I mean dressing scandalously, maybe a little wrist showing. I don't know, it got wild. Or maybe they were in the company of men unsupervised. Why am I talking morality? Because you're thinking about Britney, you're thinking about Paris, and the things that they were doing that led to people believing that they were out of control were all very oftentimes based in these ideas of what was moral and safe and healthy for a young woman to be doing. A lot of the judgment was around behavior that was either accepted or ignored if it were behavior enacted by young men. And so you start to question, well, why was this so severe? Why was this situation with these women so dangerous to the people around them that they felt like the only recourse was to shut them away or control them to the point where they had very little personal agency in the name of protecting them? What were these crazy prices that their loved ones were comfortable with paying, or were comfortable with these young women paying in the name of saving them from this other thing, saving them from marrying the wrong guy, again in Britney's case, saving them from being exploited or taken advantage of by strangers in the world in Paris's case. Maybe there was fear of substance abuse. But what is substance abuse tied to? Again, you allowing harm to come to yourself because your defenses are lowered, because it affects your health, it affects your judgment. But there was no serious signs of real substance abuse. abuse. Their lives didn't seem to be in danger. It all really seemed to focus on, keeping these young girls safe. And so again, we're back to in what world, in what context are we looking at their safety? What is safe at that time, right? You're at the end of a century where there were laws that existed that said that authorities could abduct women that seemed suspicious and forcibly send them to a facility to get STI tested. And if they were positive, they could institutionalize them and forcefully treat them with whatever they wanted to experiment on them with at that time, whether it was mercury, whether it was radiation, I don't know, the crazy things that were done to these poor women. It was called the American Act. It was in response to the levels of gonorrhea and syphilis in soldiers in World War I, so the state of men in World War I. And so how do we control what these men are doing? Adam and Eve, control the women, you control the men. And this went on from around World War I. In some places, this was still going on up until the 70s. And then you had the sexual revolution, you have the civil rights movement, you had a lot of laws enacting what you could and couldn't do to people's bodies that protected a lot of these groups in danger. And it has changed. But change takes time. And the ideas behind this are still around. They're still around today. Now, are they around in the same ways that they were 20 years ago? No, but they're still around. Because again, refer back to as soon as Britney's doing anything out of the ordinary online, everybody's like, oh, she should have been shut away. And then that goes into the whole conversation about mental health. If somebody is not harming themselves or anybody else, but they are not behaving within the prescribed, sectioned off, cordoned off box that we as society considers normal behavior, then what? And then what when they're a man versus a woman? Because those are different situations. Let's get away a little bit from these big ideas, right? Morality, Adam and Eve. What am I talking about? I'm talking about stuff from like 500 years ago. Let's get a little more concrete. Because a lot of times when we ask ourselves, how did this happen? Wow, that's crazy. The number one thing that we need to do is follow the money. Follow the money, babes, right? Like there's so many reports of how much money Britney's dad has made from the conservatorship, how much money the people around her have made from the conservatorship. There's even some speculation about who else might have been paid off within this structure, in the legal system, in these medical facilities. We have a lot of institutional bias where we feel like doctors and lawyers and public figures are meaning well, right? Because they went to school for that, or they've been doing that, or they've been trained for that. But these are so often havens of abuse. So we're going to look at the specific places that we're talking about. So we'll start with Provo Canyon, which is the school that Paris was sent to. Again, it's a school that treats kids for the troubled teen industry, and they treat them for a myriad of reasons. I posted a bit of a piece of their website in part 2. Let's talk about some of the things that they treat as per their website. Serious emotional disturbance, the amount of things that can fall underneath this umbrella is frightening. There are serious disorders that I'm assuming have to be diagnosed by a psychiatrist, even though they're psychiatrists on staff and called into a lot of questions. They have childhood schizophrenia, they have schizophrenic disorder. Okay. Then they have something called generalized anxiety disorder. Again, the things you can put under this umbrella to justify institutionalizing these kids. Crazy. They also have something called sexual and gender identity disorder. And when you look this up, this basically says when somebody's sexuality and their gender don't match up. And I'm wondering, what is this treatment? This sounds like somebody who's transgender or non-binary. We have words today for that. What is Provo Canyon doing to these children for these disorders? And this is without the child's agency. Like we talked about in the last video, the parents basically sign over all of their parental rights to these facilities. And because parents have such broad latitude with what they can do with their own children, these places now have basic carte blanche to do everything that they want outside of killing your children. They are allowed to discipline them physically, and that includes all types of abuse. That includes anything that a parent would legally be allowed to do to their child, striking them as long as it's not with a weapon, reducing their food, reducing their freedom, where they can go, what they can do. What does this entail? Very often it's all different kinds of abuse and some kind of manual labor. So let's follow that school, facility, whatever institution, prison, like we said before, over to their parent company. It's the Aspen Education Group. Aspen Education Group also owns seasons, Turnabout Ranch. Turnabout Ranch, where have we heard of that before? If any of you watch daytime television, then you know that Turnabout Ranch is the facility that Dr. Phil sends kids to. Dr. Phil, who we posted clips from in the last video. Dr. Phil, who has made a lot of money off of helping troubled youth that like to go on TV and talk crazy and that we all like to watch and gasp about. Troubled youth who very often are girls. Well, how much does Provo Canyon cost? Since we're following the money. Reportedly, Provo Canyon costs $12,500 per year. A lot of these times, the kids are left in there for their teenage years up until their majority. So let's call it 16 to 18. You've got 2 years at $12,500 a month, 24 months. Let's do the math. You're looking at $300,000. Interesting. And these people, this Aspen group, sponsors Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil, who, let's take a look. Show ran for over 20 seasons. Its last season was 2023. And according to the internets, he was making anywhere from $80 million to $90-some odd million per year. At a certain point, he was the highest paid television personality. His net worth, again, according to the internets, is over $400 million. Now, Mr. Phil has been sued multiple times for different reasons. Some of those suits including parents of these kids or the kids themselves who have said that they have been mistreated. There have been, like we talked about in the last video, multiple accusations against these different facilities for children dying, for them needing amputation, for them needing health care of one kind or another during their stay there. And that's not including the unreported emotional and physical abuse that they have to live with for the rest of their lives. And to be fair, like I showed in my last video, Dr. Phil wasn't the only person who was subscribing to this kind of drama for the sake of ratings. Maury was another one. Mr. Maury, how much was he making when his show was airing? Reportedly around $13 million a year. His net worth is about $80 million. Troubled teens, troubled young people are big business. Big business, as evidenced by, guess who it is again? Dr. Phil showing up in 2008 to the hospital where Britney was taken after the episode with her and Kevin where she had the standoff and she didn't want to give up the kids. How the hell did Dr. Phil get to the hospital? Her mother called him. Again, getting back to families and how warm and fuzzy they are. She calls him. He ends up releasing a statement to E! That he gets in a lot of trouble for, saying that based off of his visit there, he definitely feels like Britney needs some help. Family gets upset with him, and this puts the world gets upset with him. There's a huge backlash. Like, you're supposed to be this doctor, which we know that he hasn't been licensed in forever, but you're supposed to be this doctor. Why are you talking about somebody's mental health or physical health or any kind of health when you've been called to a hospital as a trusted source? He ends up putting the kibosh on his 2-episode planned Britney special that he was hoping would help her. The second episode was going to have Lynn come on as part of parents who struggle with adult children who have mental health issues. What was she going to gain from that? I don't know. Publicity, money in some fashion. I know that Phil doesn't pay anybody who comes on the show, but where that leads, I don't know. Does that help cement the whole argument that her daughter needs to be cared for and it helps the family take over all of her finances? I don't know. Her mom was super intertwined in all of her business for a while in the beginning. She wrote a book with her. She was in interviews, and then Britney kind of takes agency and becomes a full adult, and her mom kind of gets pushed out of the picture. Maybe she doesn't like that. I don't really know what happened there, but again, you have a mother who's seeing something troubling about their child, and instead of the first step being, let me try to figure out how to help you and protect you as much as I possibly can, there's this sort of reactionary response that harms their daughters more than helps them. Since we're tracing money, how much was Britney's rehab after that time, after Dr. Phil paid her the great visit that she went into? $60,000 a month, reportedly $60,000 a month. That's not including all the psychiatric care that, according to her, she had to go through on a daily basis. All of the different health providers, the medication providers. I don't know how many millions of dollars this woman had to have paid out for her own health care that was against her will to save her from marrying a paparazzi guy, because the world would have ended and everything would have imploded. She married the paparazzi guy. So we look at all of this, and we look at all of the money, and we look at all of the craziness, and we look at the lack of real care given to these young women, and we're like, why? Like, why are young women in particular so dangerous or seen as such a threat or so scary that we have to control them? I think it really comes down to any group that you're talking about who's not in control, who's powerful and able, and the people in control people know that those people, they're a threat to their power. Because if you have all the spots on top and I'm as capable as you of doing whatever it is that you do, then I could maybe replace you. And you don't ever want to be replaced. Because why? Whoever wants to give up power? Like I said in the beginning, we are of the belief that we are the more moral group. We have evolved past everybody that came before us, and we would make better decisions and we would do better things. Some of the legislation around women's health, body autonomy might say otherwise, but my hope is that as some of these things become more open, we're having these conversations, we're finding out what really happens. I'm hoping that we continue to try to live up to this idea of we are better, we are evolved. Just by benefit of the fact that we believe that we are, it will push us into different thought spaces, force us to look at things from a different perspective and take different actions. I hope for the sake of all the other young women that follow these amazing young women, I really hope things get better, continue to get better. So if you made it this far, we're going to give these two memoirs 4 pandas. It's really high. They were not the masterpieces of literature, but by virtue of their story, how powerful they were, and how significant these two women were for my generation in particular, they deserve every single one of those pandas. I think it's the first time I've had 2, well, I haven't had that many that I've talked about at the same time, but it's the first time that they both have the same amount of pandas. So that's exciting. What you need to do right now is go and subscribe. You should like this video and you should come back and you should see if I ever have 2 books that have matching pandas again, because that's like, it's an event. I felt like it was an event. It felt very significant just now. If you were sitting here beside me, you would feel the significance of the moment. So again, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. I really appreciate every single one of you. I'm starting to get more viewers. It's so exciting. I'm up to 60 subscribers and I just don't even know what to do with myself. I really appreciate every single person that chooses to spend any little bit of their time talking with me from the ether, listening to my silly words, and I really hope that you're here to stay for the long haul, because I am. Again, thank you guys. See you in the next one. And if you haven't watched 1 or 2 still, what are you doing? Go back now after you like and subscribe. And like and subscribe those. No, subscribe and like those. Yeah, that. Bye guys.